Good day, beautiful people in the world of tone. We are happy to see you, and we're happy to have back our old friend, Reverend Dr. Brian Omilion and Reverend Dr. Grant Klassen. And I say Reverend because it's almost a religious experience when you get into the world of tone. And of course, you know, they've put in their 10,000 hours doing pedalboards. So to the degree that there's a doctor of building rigs, they're definitely in that category in my book. I want to remind people before we get into today's podcast that we have a Facebook page dedicated to Chairmen of the Boards. Now, this may sound silly to you, but I'll tell you what's cool about it is this is a place where geeks like you and I can converse about our rig builds, challenges that we're having in terms of building the rig. It's a great place to get advice. We are actively on there and responding to people's questions and commentary. So it's a place where we can interact separately from the podcast. If you're interested in going there, we don't yet have any weird questions or barriers to entry. So you can just get right in. You don't have to answer strange questions like write down 3 rig building cable types or something like that, like they might have as a barrier to entry on other such groups. You can just get right in. All you have to do is just come over. I'll put the description or I'll put the link in the description so that you can get right to it. So please do join us there. And please do leave us a review on your favorite podcast, wherever you find it. If that's on Apple, if that's on Spotify, wherever it is, we would appreciate a review. It doesn't need to be the best review in the world. It just needs to be an honest one. That's all we appreciate. And that just helps more people find us just like you have. So with that said, we're going to talk about a cool event that that I was involved with for the last few weeks, which was the NBA All-Star Game. And as you might have guessed,
you're good at basketball.
I am.
Very good.
I was just sinking threes all game long. Now, I worked with Raphael Sadiq, who, if you're unfamiliar with that name, he was, I would say, one of the architects of 90s R&B, and it was in a band called Tony in the 90s, but also has been involved with musically with the production side of a lot of really historic albums, one of which being Voodoo by D'Angelo. He was involved in the most recent Beyonce record, which has won several Grammys. And he's been involved with just countless hit records in bands in many different capacities, and is a Bay Area legend. And the cool thing about the All-Star Game is that they seem to really care about having quality live music. They could have just as easily had a DJ, but they decided that they wanted to err on having live music, and not only live music, but having Bay Area representation, because the Bay Area was hosting the All-Star Game in San Francisco at the Golden State Warriors Stadium called Chase Center. And they wanted to have live music from Bay Area bands. And so Raphael was tasked with having to create a medley of 12 songs that were all from Bay Area legendary artists and bands. So this ranged from everything from Metallica to the Doobie Brothers, to Journey, Santana, Green Day, MC Hammer. It covered a ton of genres, and they had to be these seamless transitions between all of these different songs. And so not only was it that you're creating, you know, a sort of a version of those songs, but you have to go to something else that's in a totally different key and tempo right after it. And in essence, this was designed to be what opened the show, and then what transitioned to all of the player like walkouts that would occur. And the format of the All-Star Game is a little different this year than in previous years, where ordinarily it would just be Eastern Conference versus Western Conference. But this year it was kind of like a round robin, and they separated teams based on, I don't know exactly what the organization was, but there was like, you know, one team was coached by Charles Barkley, another team was coached by Kenny Smith, and I can't remember who the other coaches were, but basically they separated into 4 teams, and they did like a round robin, you know, to end up with 2 teams, and they were kind of played in these shorter, more abbreviated basketball games so that they could have it all occur in one day. But in any case, um, we were rehearsing for, in essence, 10 days before the All-Star game to sort of come up with the arrangements of those 12 songs, rehearse those transitions to get in and out of them, which I think is probably the most consequential. And then, come to the Chase Center and start to rehearse it there, where not only are we playing the songs, but you're seeing these crews assemble a stage that's separated into 20 pieces. They have to bring it all together, connect it all with power during a commercial break, and that was a lot of the rehearsals, having them wheel the whole thing off stage, disassembled, bring it back on stage, reassemble it. The band takes the stage, goes through the whole set. They take the whole thing apart, wheel it all off, the court, and then do it all over again, 10 times, something like that.
Wow.
But it was a really cool experience. And one thing I was commenting to the guys, Brian and Grant, before we went live, and we'll get into depth about this a little bit more as we talk, but it was one of the few scenarios where I could really see the value in an amp simulation or some sort of modeling. As you know, if you've been listening to us for any amount of time, I am averse to that as kind of the mode of delivering your sound. But boy, when you're dealing with broadcast and all that stuff, and there are all these other factors, having live amps on stage, it's almost a hindrance, not just for the sound, but for the whole operation, because you're dealing with so many factors, and everything's in ears anyway. And the level that you're allowed to use in this particular context, because they're dealing not only with the amps on stage, but there's all these mics that are like in the stadium that are used to sort of amplify crowd noise and things like that. So if the stage is too loud and you're in the middle of this basketball court and it's going out into the stadium of this Chase Center, it's picking it up through all these other mics that are part of the broadcast. Then you end up getting this weird sort of phasing issue that occurs because you have these multiple sources that are picking up the amplifier noise. And there's not really an opportunity here to bury the amplifiers off stage because of just how fast everything needs to come together. The whole stage needs to basically be built in 5 minutes in a commercial break, and then they come back and then the band is going. And there wasn't really a place to go and stash the amps or get them somewhere else. And I think in that case, although I'm glad that Raphael was committed to having this be as analog as possible in terms of the signal path, I think in this particular case, it might have been advisable to go with, a quad cortex, a helix, a Dream 65, or any combination thereof, because it was a challenge to take what had been rehearsed in this rehearsal space that was nearby and then translate that to the stage in terms of volume, because it just wasn't tolerable. But I want to take a break for a second and just check in, because I've been doing a lot of talking.
You're good.
What are your guys' thoughts on that, as far as like the amp sim capability, like using an amp sim? And I mean, I know that a lot of people are probably like nodding their heads, or like, I've been saying this the whole time you've been talking about amps, and like you idiot. But I would say that this was like truly like the best case scenario for something that was an amp sim. Like, it just wouldn't have gone, it would have made everything so much easier for them, because even in the mix, and you can watch the whole thing on the NBA YouTube channel, the whole like player introduction thing with this, the guitars are kind of buried a little bit. I would say, like, you really hear the bass, you really hear the drums, you hear the keyboards and the horns to a degree, but the guitars are kind of buried, because I think that when something's poking out of a mix too much, the only thing the broadcast people know how to do, because they're not necessarily musical, is just to bring down those faders.
Yeah.
But
it's surprising to hear they didn't use something like, an amp sim, even the UA pedals. Like, what was it, the Edge, who switched over to those for all of his stuff in Vegas?
I suspect he switched over for similar reasons, not because he thought it sounded better. And I think that's,
that's huge though. The fact that, a guy who runs how many amps at a time? I mean, he runs a handful
more than one.
Yeah. The videos I've seen on YouTube, and I'm sure they could be old. He had a hallway lined up of, all these different amps and the settings and stuff. So yeah, it is surprising. I definitely like hearing it from a broadcast view. Yeah, I mean, everything is in-ear related. It's like, if there were wedges on the stage, that would have been a nightmare. I could see that, the echoing. But the fact that it was all in-ear monitor is surprising. That it wasn't even like, even if it was like their amp sim, but there is stage volume so they can feel it, but they're taking the amp sim signal so they can get a cleaner broadcast mix. I haven't listened to the broadcast mix. I'm actually going to go and watch it after this, because we're talking about what we're going to talk today about. And it is surprising for an instance like that, because you'll get other live stuff on TV, Super Bowl, you're always wondering what they're using, if they're using live amps, if they're using direct or whatever. So yeah, it's surprising to hear that they didn't, especially with such a short time frame. Because what I'm guessing, were the amps out on stage mic'd up?
Yeah.
Wow. So that mic,
mic'd.
The mic alone is getting the whole stadium noise through that microphone. You're just it's just an infinity loop of that noise going back through that mic. Unless, were they covered? I know they have some of those baffles that nothing.
No, and it was a twin reverb, so it's we're talking about an 85 watt tube amp,
big boy
mic, in a full analog pedal board, and I rented them pedal boards that I had to use for this, and it was fairly basic. It's surprisingly, one of the surprises for me pedal wise is covering all that genre of music. I think that it covered everything from R&B. There was a few Tony songs and Raphael Sadiq songs. I think they opened it with a Raphael Sadiq song called 100 Yard Dash, which is fairly clean, kind of Motown-ish vibe. And then, they go into things like Brain Stew from Green Day, which is kind of a pretty rockin' thing. They did China Grove from Doobie Brothers, and this has some gain and stuff like that. Of course, Enter Sandman has quite a bit of gain. He used the Ultraphonics overdrive for almost all that, for the drive sound. Which was surprising to me, because I usually don't think of it as being that gainy. But
you don't think Metallica when you think Ultraphonics?
I don't. But with his hands and that guitar, it seemed to be the right fit. And I should mention the other guitar player there, who is the musical director as well, was Isaiah Sharkey. And boy, watching him work, and he was kind of basically, coming up with the arrangements, the transitions. And then each day when Raphael would get there, would then run down kind of like what he was thinking, and kind of the process of this, starting from day one, like 10 days before the actual performance. He would, kind of take the 12 song set list and kind of like small chunks, they would kind of develop those, figure out those transitions, because they also have to time it with a kind of like basically like a scratch voiceover from the announcer that's like, and number 6, Joe Smith, whatever it is. So they had to kind of correlate the timing of their transitions between the songs with what they have from TNT, the broadcast, about how the cadence and the delivery of their announcements are going to go, because these are almost treated like walkout songs in essence. And so they're basically developing all of that, to what they have, and then running it down and getting the tones dialed in. And I was basically just there in the capacity to ensure that the sounds that they got were representative of the original music to the degree possible. And so bringing effects and pedals to kind of help get each of those different songs fairly sorted out. My impression is that we were going to need switchers because just the nature of that stuff. And Isaiah did have his own Boss programmable switcher that he used to do all this trip. You must have been. Yeah.
Wow.
And then used that, and then had some multi effects and things like that to kind of cover, because he was carrying the majority guitar load, and had to be able to do a lot of stuff. Like in the opening of Enter Sandman, had to have like an acoustic kind of patch. Originally, he was using a PRS that had like a piezo selection, so he could start that kind of arpeggio that's in the intro, and have that sort of ready to go, and then just hit a switch, and then be on the electric for kind of the more heavier, like distortion stuff. But it turned out that it was easier to set like an acoustic piezo kind of sounding patch on the multi effects than it was to switch back and forth to the piezo on the guitar.
Interesting.
I don't know if that was because the switch was becoming intermittent or what the reason was, but they ended up kind of doing it all with guitar, or with one guitar, and then just using different patches for the programming.
Was he using the same amp as?
No, so he likes. We were talking about this a lot. He likes the 410 Hot Rod DeVille.
Oh yeah,
because he likes the tens kind of give up the goods a little faster in terms of like that they distort a little earlier, and so he can set the amp a little lower and still get some nice response from the speaker distortion. Was his take on it. So he was using a 410 Hot Rod DeVille for everything, all the effects in front of the amp. And then Raphael was using one of my pedal boards into the front of the Twin, and it was pretty abbreviated. It was like, tuner. There was a fuzz on there that I don't think he ever ended up using. The Ultraphonics. He used a lot of Vertex boost. There's a Vertex boost on there, and then there was an EP booster on there. So sometimes if he had on the Ultraphonics and wanted more gain, he would hit it with the EP booster. And then if he wanted just more level, then he'd hit the Vertex boost. Yeah. And we had the large carbon copy, the one with the tap tempo. And I had a readout, tap tempo readout from Disaster Area, so that he could, tap a BPM if there was like on China Grove. There's like a really obvious delay on the guitar, and so just like tapping in that tempo going into it and having the BPM locked. And then we used a Polara reverb, which is one of my favorites, which is sort of like the next generation of the RV7 by Digitech hardwire. Just using it for just a little room sound because they're so close mic'd. It's just kind of nice to have a little bit. And he wasn't using any reverb from the Twin, so this was just a little way just to create some space. It wasn't real obvious, but just a little bit of space there. So pretty simple in terms of the rig, and then the wah-wahs and volume pedal. He wanted a volume pedal up front to kind of simulate what the guitar would have been doing. So he said an Ernie Ball one up front. And then the wah-wah is one interesting thing I wanted to share. This is an interesting thing that was not expected. So we shot out a ton of wahs because he wanted to use wah-wah with some of the clean stuff, and then also in Enter Sandman, when that arpeggio kind of acoustic thing is happening, there's like a wah that's kind of like sweeping back and forth. Yeah. And so we rehearsed the whole thing. We went through a bunch of wahs. He ended up going with the blubber wah, which is the crying baby machine, according to Maxon.
Not the cry baby.
Crying.
Yeah, so crying baby.
I've talked about this wah many times. If you want a vintage wah that's at a very affordable price, get the Maxon blubber wah. It is a 70s wah, stack of dimes inductor, all old school parts and components. It sounds amazing. It's got that really short sweep like an old wah would have. I think you can get them for like $150. They're great wahs. He was loving it. We were using it. They called it a crying baby machine because I think they were worried about like a lawsuit to not call it a cry baby. So from now on, I've said this before, we should call wahs crying baby machines. It's just such a way cooler name. But anyway, so we love that wall. We rehearsed that wall. We get to the Chase Center, and the stage is in essence a TV. So like underneath the stage there, and you can see this if you watch the footage, or maybe Gabriel, if you're listening here, our editor, if you could throw some footage from the NBA website on the player walk, you can see the stage in essence a TV screen that is like lighting up as the band is playing. And as soon as that started, that inductor in that wall was just like, whoo, it's like crazy howling, crazy. Because it, these walls existed before they needed to worry about having stages that were in essence TVs,
just big LED screens.
Right underneath it, right underneath his feet. And so it was like, well, back to the drawing board now on the Wasps. We have to figure out which one was going to work. And so I was certain that it was going to be a modern wah that has a lot of protection, as far as like, a mu metal can over the inductor and all that stuff. And so, I'm putting out the full tone. I'm putting out some of the more modern, like Dunlop stuff that I have. None of that's working. The shock was the one that worked was I have an older Crybaby, like top logo, like late 60s wah that was restored by Venus Witch in the UK. And you wouldn't think that, do you think that one would have the same problem given that it's vintage? That was the only one that didn't howl.
Wow.
Like crazy. So we ended up using this like 69 Crybaby that sounded great too. I was kind of surprised that worked, but it did.
That's crazy. Yeah. That's cool.
I want to talk more about this. We can get into some other kind of cool, interesting things that were part of the experience. But before we do, I want to break for an ad. So I will turn it over for the ad break.
Awesome. Hey, so our first of our two sponsors are going to be the guys over at the Guitar Sanctuary, who we talk about every single week, and they do have a lot of the stuff that we're actually talking about. They have amps, they have guitars, they have pedals, they have amp sims, they have acoustics, piezo guitars, piezo. They have those guitars handy. So go check them out at guitarsanctuary.com. You can use the phone number that they have. You can text them. You can call them. Funny enough, I worked there 6 years and I still don't remember the phone number for them. So if you need their phone number,
911 tone 911 emergency.
Do it. It's always a tone emergency. So go check them out. Shoot them a message. Sometimes if you order gear before 3:00 Central Time, they ship it out the same day. They're really, just top-notch guys. So check them out. Brian, Shane, Trey, Taylor, Daniel. They have a in-store luthier. So if you are local and you want to go into the store and check out the goodness of the Sanctuary, go check them out. Get a guitar repaired, restrung, refretted, whatever you need at guitarsanctuary.com. Next are going to be the guys over at Neural DSP with the Quad Cortex and the Nano Cortex. I'm still amazed at the amount of stuff that they're coming out with, and especially in an application like this that we've been talking about can really come in handy, especially on even just the amp sim level of stuff. You could take your favorite amp from, for the Quad Cortex or the Nano Cortex, and you can capture it. I did that with my Nano Cortex when I got it. Their stock settings are awesome. I just really liked how some of my Jackson Ampwork amps and some of my Fenders that I have sounded. So what I did is just captured them and I mic'd them up, or I had my a load box, and it was that easy. I just ran through the process on the app. It gives you step by step what to do. If you want, you can capture it in the Quad Cortex. If you have certain plugins for the Quad Cortex that you like from Neural DSP, with our code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, for 30% off their plugins, you can load those plugins onto the Quad Cortex, not skipping a single beat. You can go from that studio session to a gig, same plugins. You won't be disappointed. Check them out at neuraldsp.com. I do actually have an amp question. I've been wanting to ask, were these amps set clean, edge of breakup. Because I mean, the DeVille is probably one of my favorite. Like I think back in the day, I would go to Guitar Center and I picked up a White Falcon and I plugged it into a DeVille, and those are like my go-tos. And I just loved how that amp always sounded. I have a Falcon, I don't have a DeVille, but it's on my list to get. Where they set edge of breakup or clean because you had so many, you had pedals for
they I would say they were set pretty clean, and they got cleaner once it went to the broadcast. I think that we'd been rehearsing with the Twin on like 4, which is still pretty clean for a Twin because it's. Yeah. And then by the time we got to the broadcast, I think it was like on 1.5 or 2. And then with the Hot Rod DeVille, that one breaks up earlier, but still, again, because the stage volume needed to be so low.
Yeah,
they weren't really hearing much, if any, or certainly not feeling anything from their amps because they had to get low enough where it wasn't going to bleed into those mics out in the crowd. Yeah. And, they were hearing it all in the in-ears. And I think that's kind of going back to the idea of the amp sims. Like you could really see the value of it there. And I think also just from the standpoint of the mix, like as a guitar player, you want to hear yourself. You're hoping that the broadcast is representative of the mix that you're hearing in your ear. And I think it's a lot more feasible to get that when it's in the amp sim environment, because you're pretty much getting the same thing that you're hearing in your in-ears at that point. Whereas like the difference between what the mic'd amp is and what your in-ear is has to be pretty different, because the amp is so low that they're bringing up the levels probably for your in-ears, and the mix that's going to broadcast is probably, closer to what the mic is getting, which is like this really kind of smaller, quieter guitar sound. And so, if the guitars can't be off stage, or the amps couldn't be off stage, I mean, like they would be in an ideal sense if you were doing something like that. I think that they should have gone that way. But, this is all to say, like, I at the same time, I appreciate that, like, you don't see a lot of guys anymore that want to use real amps. And Raphael was adamant that we use real amps, analog gear for the pedals. I think the only digital pedal that was on the whole rig was a reverb, the Polara reverb.
Okay.
Analog drive-through still, and using tube amps and real guitars. He used my Joe Reggio, conversion thing.
So would like being live and real like that, beautiful guitar,
beautiful.
Would something like a 2 notes or an aux box or something to really kind of like run the amp through it to have a stronger signal that you can attenuate be something that, like, if you're so adamant about not digital?
Yeah, that could have been another thing, is like using, like a Sur reactive load and then just using the line out. That could have been an option for sure. Yeah. The 2 notes, I guess you would need you'd need the one that had the load, because you would basically just need to take away the speaker.
Or an aux.
Yeah.
Or an aux.
Yeah.
Something like that would have worked for sure, and would have given them something like that. I just wonder though, for like the purposes of the rehearsal, like would they probably would have still wanted like and that's fine. They have a through that you could have used for the rehearsal, but I think once it went to that stage, they probably would have needed it to be fully silent, and that would be sort of the closest semblance. But again, there was other challenges too, where they had like limited channels on stuff. Like originally the intent was maybe we go stereo, but they didn't have that many channels for both guitar players to go stereo. So the path of least resistance was mono. Also, I think that they were concerned about having sufficient backups. Like all those amp rentals came from SIR. We blew up 2 Twin Reverbs in 10 days. And it's not like we were running them hard. 4 on a Twin Reverb is like nothing. It's as far as the Twin Reverb is concerned.
Yeah.
It's not like you're running the amp really hard and the speakers are, yeah, like we blew up 2 of them in rehearsals. I was like, God, man, like what is SIR doing to these things? Like
Oh my gosh.
surprisingly, Isaiah Sharkey's DeVille, I don't think ever had a problem.
And that's not an expensive amp. Like there's nothing fancy about a 410 DeVille.
I'm not saying that that's the best amp in the world or that it's even built that great, but surprisingly, they didn't have any issues. But it should be said that there was 2 duplicate backlines. So there was one in the rehearsal space that was like there were 2 twins there, and then there was another set of twins that was at the Chase Center that was a different backline altogether. Because basically the intent was that they would mirror the same setup at the Chase Center as they did in the rehearsal space. Because some days we would go to the Chase Center, run through 5, like run throughs where they would fully disassemble the stage, wheel it off, the court, wheel it back on, reassemble it, run through the 12 songs, do that a bunch of times. And then we would go back to the rehearsal studio and then run it again, based on like the notes that were given. Because there's a separate MD as well for the broadcast, which is Adam Blackstone, who is kind of become sort of like the Ricky Minor of this generation of MDs. And so he was kind of giving them notes each day to kind of like, okay, let's tighten this up or let's elongate this part or, things of that nature so that it kind of matched up best with what the broadcast wanted. Okay. I mean, he's doing everything too. I think he did the Super Bowl like, a couple weeks before this. So he's kind of like the guy as far as like MDs are concerned. So he was the one that was kind of the liaison with Isaiah Sharkey, who is, MDing for Sadiq. But yeah, I mean, the band was absolutely insanely good. Like they had like a full like brass section from New Orleans. So amazing horn players, background vocalists. They had a guy who's great named BJ Kemp, who's kind of a local guy here. Who's been singing with Raphael for a long time. They had LaToya London, who is and also a Bay Area legend and was kind of an American Idol finalist. I think she's in top 3 or top 5, maybe in kind of the early days of American Idol. Great vocalist. And then they had another vocalist I didn't know, but she was fantastic as well. And a bunch of gospel guys that Sharkey had brought out from Chicago for bass, Maurice Fitzgerald, and drums, and then one of the Tonys, Timothy Christian Riley, played the organ and keyboards. They also had another keyboard player that Sharkey brought out from Chicago. And man, just a fantastic band all the way around. I mean, they were super tight. Basically, everything was just adjustments for the broadcast. Like they could have done that show after the one day of rehearsal if they wanted to. Like they were all that good, and just seeing the way that they worked, it was very impressive. Like Sharkey is a great MD. Like I've seen a lot of MDs, and he's a really good one.
That's cool.
Because he understands the idea that you're when you go to deal with the broadcast, you need to protect your band, but then you also kind of need to keep the 10,000 foot view, of kind of what do they want, kind of overarching, in basically protecting his band so they don't look like fools by having to, accommodate the broadcast in a way that doesn't make musical sense, and so I think he was trying to toe that line and doing it, very diplomatically. But before we talk more about it, I want to also get into another ad from some companies that make our podcast possible every single week. I'm going to turn that over to Grant. We can keep talking more after that about the All-Star Game.
Cool. Yeah. So I want to tell you guys about Bestronics, and obviously we talk a decent amount about pedalboards here on Chairmen of the Boards, and Bestronics is the place to go to finish off your rig. So if you need to get bolt connectors, cable, even looms, or some people might call them snakes, rack gear, all sorts of stuff, you can get it done at BTPA. And you can use the code DUCHAIRS, DACHAIRS, Ask for Brad, and he is a human Rolodex of part numbers and what is possible and the parts you need to finish off your rig, and he'll definitely help you out to get that all sorted. So btpa.com, use the code DUCHAIRS. And for all of our syrup suckers, all of our Canadians wearing flannel today, as you know, I am one of you. I'm just, it's a little warm in here. My flannel is currently off. But we have a music store here in Canada called GB Music and Sound. And here you can ask for Greg. He is based in Red Deer, Alberta. He has a wall of tone. I'm possibly coming over to the idea that Tone Town is actually GB Music and Sound up here in Canada.
In Alberta. Because it's humble Alberta.
Just incredible. Incredible. The gear that he has. I could be wrong, but I could be right. So GB Music and Sound, if you guys want to help support the show, the link is in the show notes below. And by using that link, you help us out here at the show and keep these episodes coming. And obviously, Greg would be happy to chat to all of the Canadians listening here on Chairman of the Board. So check him out, gbmusicandsound.com, for studio gear, guitar gear. Even if you're getting into ukulele, this is the place to go in Canada. I'll throw it back to you, Mason.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if there's any, again, I've been talking for a while, any questions or things that you think we should dive into?
I think the thing that this is reminiscent of when I was back in Australia, a lot of the stuff that you're saying, but I was quite involved in a large church over there. And whenever there was a big event at one of the arenas or something like that, you would rehearse forever. And then you would get to the venue to rehearse, and you're basically sitting around for the whole day because you do 5 minutes of like getting on stage, getting off stage, loading, unloading, all that. And then everyone else has to set lighting, sound, front of house has to do sound, monitors has to do their own EQs, broadcast is a totally separate room and area. They have to do their own EQs for sending out of the venue. And it is a long and tiring process. The thing that stands out to me, though, which was my experience, obviously church is very different than an NBA All-Star game, but there would be dummies of everything. So even for the amps, let's say for this stage, they would have amps on this little stage, but they would only be there for visual, adding to the vibe of the stage. And absolutely, there would be a split of your guitar signal going to an amp sim or a Kemper or whatever it was off stage that would go to both front of house monitors and broadcast. And even if there was a string section or a horn section, that would all be dummied and they would be tracked. And the track is what you hear, but you'd be seeing the real horn players. Obviously, if you get a horn section in from, was it Louisiana, you said?
Yeah, New Orleans, yeah.
New Orleans, you're going to use them. Like that's a totally different thing.
Absolutely.
But it just shot, like, I'm so happy to hear, and I'm assuming by reading between the lines here, but I'm so happy to hear that all of the music that was heard, vocals, instruments, drums, guitars, it was played
live
through analog instruments, live, nothing tracked, like 0 tracks.
No tracks.
That makes me so happy, man.
Click?
I absolutely love that.
No click.
I was going to ask if you guys were clicked as well.
No, and the reason why it wasn't
Makes
clicked is because the variable is like how long it takes for the player to walk, from like the back of the ramp to the front of the ramp where it like exits onto the court, because basically the players are walking out onto the court and then they're being escorted to different corners of the court based on like which of the 4 teams they're on for the game. And so there was sort of like a tolerance built into each one of those transitions. Like if this guy's a little slow, we're going to run another bar wherever it makes sense to like transition. And then they're just getting the cues from the MD on like a talkback mic. It's like, although I think sometimes the frustration is that sometimes the broadcast would try to get them to transition faster for certain things. Like if the guy went like super fast or something like that, You know, and they wouldn't have the understanding of like, we can't just transition to the next song in the middle of a bar, you know, like, because like sometimes the guys come in, they go, all right, 3, 2, 1, you know, like that cadence.
Nope.
Nope. Literally, nope.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And so anyway, you know, they're but again, I think it's just kind of like all chalked up to the professionalism. Like, you know, the MD has to make the choice of like what's going to be musically most conducive to the whole thing.
I'm curious, maybe this is such a little detail. Were they running like I mean, they were in your monitor, so like were they all plugged into like a little digital mix rack? Like you see like Midas has like those like wing rack series where it's like
I think they were in,
was it analog board?
I don't think it was an analog board,
Okay.
but it was like a full, I mean, it was like, I don't know what the board was.
Yeah.
I don't think it was like the same as what was in like the rehearsal studio. Maybe it was.
Interesting.
But
was it wireless packs though?
It was all wireless packs. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why I was curious, because that's like seeing something where like Midas or Behringer or whoever, any of these companies that have like a rack mounted 32 channel system with, you know, XLR outs, obviously going to wireless packs, you would think like they would just pre-mix that, you know, for all their ears, and then they would take the left and right out to do their broadcast, so they don't have, you know, that's the cool thing with those types of systems, is that they can go USB out into a DAW and remix it or something, which I feel like, yes, going direct or digital or something, or having that cleaner signal probably would have been a lot easier. But yeah, I'm always really curious about that kind of stuff, because I've been rebuilding a lot of these like mobile church plant rigs for that exact reason. So I was curious, in a what do you think, 2.5 minute setup time? What did you know what you guys had?
I think they had like 5 minutes. I think they had 5 minutes to get the whole stage together. And in essence, there was just like these looms that would interconnect, you know, that would connect all the pieces of the stage, because they had to have it all powered for the stage, like LEDs to like work like a television in essence.
That's amazing.
And then also, you know, obviously power the whole stage. But that was kind of the most impressive part, because these pieces of the stage are all disassembled into 20 pieces. They have to go in and out in a certain order, so that when they come out, they all fit together the right way.
Wow.
And so it was impressive to watch, you know, that sort of component of it. These guys are wheeling these massive pieces of a stage together, and then getting them on and off the court in a few minutes, you know.
Wow. That's amazing.
The amount of logistics that goes into something like this is just mind blowing.
Yeah, I mean the manpower is insane, you know. I mean, and it wasn't just ours. Like they did that one, and then they had another, you know, band coming on after us, and then they had, you know, they had like they had a you know, a bunch of Bay Area folks. I think In Vogue did a performance. I think the rapper E40 and Too Short did a performance with DJ Cassidy. I think there was some other in the green room. Like when we were done with the performance, it was like, you know, very, very star-studded Bay Area people, like Sheila E. and like the former Giant Barry Bonds, the baseball player, was in there. Wow. Kevin Hart. It was kind of like it was definitely a star-studded event, I'll say. And it's funny, like where the stage is getting all was kind of being stored between the transitions. You know, you see the players kind of coming through the kind of like the loading dock area where the, you know, you often see them like, you know, before the pregame, where they're kind of walking through, it looks like a concrete hallway sort of thing. You get a sense of like how tall these guys are. Like it's deceptive. I mean, you know, they're tall, but when you see them like walking, even somebody who's like a smaller player by NBA standards, like Steph Curry, you know, like, you know, he's as tall as Grant, you know, like that sort of thing. And Grant is very tall, you know, and so like he's like the short end of the bell curve there as far as like NBA players, and even he like feels like pretty tall, and then some of these other guys just seem like almost like disproportionate. They're like so tall, like everything probably for them has to be custom made, for clothes and stuff like that.
I have to ask. I'm not trying to interrupt. I know I just did interrupt. Did you see Shaq? Was Shaq there?
Yeah, Shaq was there. I saw Shaq. Yeah,
I saw a photo of Shaq and Kevin Hart standing next to each other, and I was just like,
his waist.
It was just like, yeah, it's
so
which
crazy.
is crazy. It's the first time I met Grant. It's when I knew Grant was tall. You have this perception
You
of people.
mistook me for Shaq, right?
Yeah,
That's
I did.
kinda
I was like, Mr. Shaq right here. No, it was that's crazy. That's crazy that. I don't watch basketball a lot. I'm not big on basketball. I'm a hockey person, but so Canada, obviously. But like hearing like that Steph, like he is like Grant's height. That's surprising that's all. That's short in the NBA. That's crazy. That's a whole different topic. But that's cool.
Some of these guys are crazy. When you see like I can't remember the name of the French player, Victor. It's a real long last name. Starts with W. See him like walking in, it's just like he's like over 7 feet tall. He's taller than Shaq, and he's
crazy.
It's like you see these guys like this is in like this, the top percentile of like tallest people that exist.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So even like guys like Charles Barkley, like they're just big human beings, and you kind of just see him walking through and
big people, big towns.
That's right.
All right. That's cool. Yeah, it's crazy to hear that you guys did 10 hours worth of rehearsal for just you. Like
for 10 days.
10 days of rehearsal. That's way more hours. But like 10 days of rehearsal, the logistics side of that is just unreal. So yeah, super cool insight. I really appreciate it. I've all
when you see that budget for NBA All-Star game has got to be insane. It's just unreal.
When you told us that you were getting hired to do this, the first thing I thought of was, I can't wait to ask him information because I'm such a sucker for behind the scenes stuff. So I appreciate all the insight.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was really a blast to do it. And again, I feel like credit to the NBA and that like they could have just hired a DJ and that would have been like the path of least resistance. And probably for the majority of the people watching that game, it wouldn't have made one bit of difference to them.
Yeah.
But the fact that they like wanted to hire like a local artist, that is like sort of emblematic of the Bay Area. They wanted live music. They wanted this medley of, Bay Area artists and bands. And they brought like a real band to play it live and not to tracks and no click.
Awesome.
So good.
I think it's really cool. It's really refreshing. And so it was fun to be a part of that. It was cool to see the Les Paul used in like a real life context. And I got to, play it some during the rehearsals because Raphael usually would come kind of more in the second half of the day. And so they would want to hear some of these parts with both guitars going, especially for stuff where maybe there was like a harmonized guitar, like some of the Doobie Brothers stuff had like a harmonized guitar. And so getting to hear like at a stage volume.
Oh yeah.
You really get to hear what something's capable of. And, that guitar being pretty new to me, I didn't get to hear it live. I heard it in the context of my studio and recorded, and it's great. But sometimes that doesn't always translate live, or they can be, they don't cut through as well as you thought they would.
Wow.
And it was a great guitar. It's fantastic guitar. It sounds great. And in all those contexts, that was kind of cool to get to experience it in that way. And then just to get to see how these pros do their thing. It's really, really impressive to see the way that they learn songs, their process, how the MD, delivers the songs and kind of what their expectations are, and kind of watching that dynamic. And it's these guys are the best at what they do. It's very impressive to be there and be along for the ride.
Love it.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Very cool.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up today, gentlemen?
I mean, I don't think so. I don't have any final thoughts except that it was such a fun topic just to get it. It's fun to get a look into these types of things because all you see is the performance, like the Super Bowl, like, and you don't even get to see this was obviously such a big deal for the NBA. So it was a very cool little insight just to see and appreciate it more. So that's all.
Yeah.
That's all I say. I might not appreciate basketball, but I do appreciate the logistics side of the music performances.
I was going to say, with two big things happen here today, one of which Mason found a context in which amp sims were preferable.
Yes.
And it looks like you've gotten Brian and I to go watch sports. So two big things happened in today's episode. Just want to say thank you all for joining us for this historic day.
Yeah. Well, we'll put a link to the NBA's YouTube channel, and I'll direct link that performance. There's a few things that they cut off, like in the YouTube output, where like they might have shortened certain songs that like weren't actually shortened in the context of the actual performance, but
yeah,
it's mostly there. And anyway, so you get a chance to see that, and also I'll link that. And again, if you want to join us over on Facebook, it is a great resource to have for your DIY questions, or to show off your new pedalboard, or to converse with us and other tone geeks. We would love to have you there on Facebook if you're on Facebook. And again, if you could write us a review on iTunes, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, we greatly appreciate it. And we greatly appreciate you being here and being a part of what it is that we're doing. Without an audience, the podcast would be going nowhere. And so we appreciate that you're interested in these conversations. And we look forward to seeing you all next week.
Bye, guys.
See ya.